My friend was a Coast Guardsman for the U.S. Coast Guard. He told me some stories before passing away. Submitted by Oscar 494. The Coast Guard, the oldest continuous seagoing service of the United States. I still remember the day Owen got in. The widest smile I ever saw on him, apart from his wedding day, of course. It had been a dream of his since we were kids. Having shared a love for the ocean, I understood him, but where he had gone for the Coast Guard, I had settled for a swimming instructor. Not as fancy, but I enjoyed it. Through the years, Owen and I would meet up and share typical stories, nothing that seemed too out of the ordinary. It was only a few months after he joined the Coast Guard when I started to see him change. His demeanor, his expression, and overall energy that he'd bring just wasn't the same. It wasn't until I finally confronted him about it when he began to really open about what had been happening. The following are some of the stories he shared with me over the years. First story. If you guys know anything about the Coast Guard, you'll know that one of their main missions is search and rescue. One particular story involved the search for this kid after the parents reported him being carried out by a rip current. The thing that stood out about this story, though, was how the kid had gone missing. According to the parents, they'd brought their kid along with a friend, for a beach day. While the parents had been laying out in the sand, the kids had gone to the shore to see which one could hold their breath the longest underwater. The mother claimed she could see them both not too far from the shore when they went under. Less than a minute later, the friend's head popped back out, but her son's never did. The kid's friend appeared to be just as confused as the mother, going back under only to pop back out and look around. They looked around, but eventually began to panic, alerting the entire beach, at which point with someone called 911. The kid's friend had told them that they'd been staring right at each other before going under and that he'd kept his eyes closed underwater. When he came up and didn't see him, he went down again, eyes open this time, but the kid was gone. The parents had assumed it was a rip current because they didn't know what else could have taken him so suddenly. The chances of it only taking one of the kids when they were only a few feet away from each other wasn't likely though, and any type of marine life large enough to take a kid that size would have been spotted that close to the shore. Owen told me they spent the better part of the week searching for the kid, but they never found any traces of him. Second story. One case he told me about that had freaked him out involved the report of a foreign vessel being spotted in the area. He was sent out with a team to investigate. When they got there, a fishing vessel had anchored next to a sailboat in poor condition. When questioned later, the fisherman claimed he'd only wanted to help after spotting the sailboat and didn't want any trouble. When Owen's team boarded the vessel, they found a young married couple. They were hiding in the inner cabin, in a closet space, both visibly shaken. Owen tried talking to them, but they responded in another language. When the team took them outside, the couple trembled, looking around them in fear. Owen said it was a cloudless day, and the ocean was extremely peaceful, so he didn't understand what had them so frightened. They kept rambling something the team couldn't understand, one of them even yelled at some point. Someone eventually realized they were speaking Italian, and were able to find a translator to talk to them over their radio device. The translator told the team that the couple was incoherent, that they were rambling about the storm and a black and white thing. They weren't getting anything from the couple out there, so they decided to take them back to the mainland. The translator managed to calm them down, and they agreed to head back together. On the way there, one of them started talking to Owen. She was shaking again and looked terrified. Her words seemed almost as if she was pleading to him about something. Owen got the translator on the radio, but he told Owen to ignore her. Easier said than done, though. Looking back, he remembered feeling really uncomfortable, the woman being only one of the reasons. He said he felt very anxious while the translator continued to advise that he ignore her. She eventually started to yell though, and the team tried restraining her while the translator attempted to calm her down. She pushed on, screaming, fighting them while looking at something behind them. She was really losing it when they all heard a loud splash behind their boat. The woman went silent then. She looked for her husband, who had fallen asleep early on, and sat beside him. Neither one spoke for the rest of the trip. The proper authorities took the couple once they reached land, and Owen didn't hear anything about them after that. He did manage to speak to the translator not long after though. Curious, Owen asked him what the woman had been saying. The translator laughed, told him she was nuts, but then went on to say that she'd been repeating the same things over and over and over again. It's coming. It's here. It wants you now. Third story. Another bizarre missing person story that also involved kids. In this one, the parents had just bought a boat and took the family of 5 out for the day. They had anchored themselves a bit out of the way from what Owen told me. At some point, the parents took their eyes off the kids. They said it must have happened within 5 minutes, if not less, but suddenly they heard the splashes. The parents rushed down but only saw the after effect of their fall, the water already adjusting back. The oldest child, a boy of about 14 or 15, said he'd seen them watching the water from the side of the boat. He'd looked away just before they both went in. Both parents jumped into the water, but couldn't find either one of the kids. This was a girl age 6 and a boy about age 8. After failing to locate either one, the father radioed for help. When Owen's team arrived, they actually managed to find the little boy. His head had been poking out of the water not too far from where the boat had been anchored. Owen said they'd asked how he'd gotten so far on his own, and the boy told them that a man with weird eyes had asked him and his sister if they wanted to go look for treasure together. The man had apparently climbed up the boat like Spider-Man and pulled them into the ocean, then dragged them away underwater. The man then told the boy that he'd take his sister to the treasure first and then come back for him, that he was not to move from there until someone came. That was the spot they'd found the boy in. Following this, they searched long and wide for the girl, both by sea and air. They assumed the girl had been kidnapped, but no vessels were found in the area. It was Owen's longest SAR mission up to that point, taking a lot of manpower and a heavy toll on him. While glad they had found the boy, the family was a wreck, blaming themselves for not keeping their eyes on the children. The oldest kid especially. Owen said he'd been non-stop crying and even asked to please let him help in looking for her. A little over a week later, they were calling it off after having found nothing. No one wanted to make the call, but Owen said he could hear the screams on the other side of the phone even from a distance. The weirdest thing though, Owen had told me, was the description the younger boy had given of the man. He described his eyes as weird in that they were large and had different colored circles inside. He took this to mean multiple pupils in each eye. Not only that, but he also said he'd seen holes on his neck, like the smoking people on TV. It was one of the most head-scratching cases he'd worked on. Fourth story. From time to time, Owen had heard reports of compasses taking a full 180 degrees turn. Sometimes the crew wouldn't even notice. They'd be heading west at some point, and half an hour later, they'd find themselves twice as far from their destination, having gone east instead. He said it happened to him once, but they noticed the change fast enough to change directions before going too far. They blamed the electromagnetic field or some science thing, but I don't know much about that to say for sure. Fifth story. There was a time when they had a shark migration happening. They made sure to tell everyone to avoid the area. One guy didn't listen, though, and purposely went out there to see the migration happen live. The call went in not long after. A large patch of blood spotted on the shark's migration trail. When they went out to investigate, they were surprised to see a man in a small boat. Same curious bastard that had ignored the order was the one that made the call. The blood patch was huge apparently, made up from the remains of dozens of sharks. At first they thought the sharks had attacked each other for some reason, but then they stumbled upon one that had half of its body bitten off. Just down the freaking middle, Owen had told me. We're talking about a shark around 6 to 8 feet long, about 2 meters, that Owen described being bit in half by something even larger. Hell, if I know any animal capable of biting a shark in half and then leave the carcass behind. Much less, one that would feast on an entire school of sharks. Sixth story. The last story I'll share is probably one of the weirdest. Owen said he'd been introduced to this not long after joining. Said the other guys would chuckle whenever it was reported but would ignore it and just go about their day after. He didn't understand why at first, but everyone told him it was best not to ask questions, and to never ask the superiors about them. It seems that from time to time, while patrolling, teams would report finding these random sandbars in the open sea. The sandbars would always have large, odd-looking patches of vegetation growing around them, sometimes of different shapes and colors. Owen said the things would disappear within a day, sometimes even within a few hours. The orders for them were simple enough: if you see one, report it. If it disappears, report that too. Never approach them. Most importantly, don't mention them to anyone on the outside. That last rule is out now though, whoops. They'd been very specific when they told Owen not to pay them too much attention to them, and he did just that. I could tell he was really curious about them though, but he insisted he'd grown used to them, to the point he'd chuckle along with the guys whenever they were reported.